This afternoon we have artists who have initiated biennials. We have with the Lagos Biennial, which is with Folakunle on the end, the first edition being last year that he curated. Then we have Apinan Poshyananda, who is establishing the Bangkok Art Biennial this year, which takes place in October. And then we have Melati, who was the curator of the last Jakarta Biennial last year, and the artistic director, sorry. Yes, there was 5 other collaborators, right? 4. And then myself wearing 2 hats as the artistic director of the Factory Contemporary Art Center in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and also one of the curators of the forthcoming Sharjah Biennial opening March next year. So we're tasked this afternoon to speak about the context of curating, and I think that it should be noted that from an art world perspective, we're 4 people based in presumed margins from the international scene. However, I think that each of us are living and working and contributing to scenes that are incredibly important to not only the regions that we sit, but also the countries that we are from and live. And in that context, I think there are very different kinds of art worlds. We're having an extremely uneven arts infrastructure. And as artists and curators working in these places, personally, I believe it's incredibly important to be understanding the needs of your local. And I think in that way, each of us will be responding to those ideas in different ways this afternoon. So to kick off, I thought it would be worth touching upon the importance of collaboration and the sites that you choose to work as curators and the need to respond to these with the works that you choose artistically. So, Melati, if I could start with the Jakarta Biennial. In conversations you were mentioning that the last edition was you chose to collaborate with certain museum sites that for the first time. If you could talk a bit more about that.
Hello, everybody. It's me again. I was in the talk at 1 o'clock about the performance and the body. Now I'm coming back for the curator sections. And so basically when I received the job, accept the job as the artistic director, I was actually surprised. Oh, what should I contribute? You know, because I'm an artist, I've never been really into the into the curatorial practice. I never learned how to curate, academically, and writing is seems to be a very monster for me. I cannot really, I don't write well. So, but for me, the Biennial, Jakarta Banyan, it had to take its place in because now at the moment in Indonesia, our local context is more like biased because every province they want to make an art biennial. So I think the tendency to compete each province is higher, and so since Jakarta Biennial is like the oldest and the biggest, so I think it had to be. It had to offer something special that has to do also with the localities, but in terms of the national. How do you say, national range, but also global context. So working with the local museum was one of my our strategy actually, because we have a very nice museums in Jakarta with old ex-colonial buildings from the 17th centuries, 18th centuries, 19th centuries, and they were officially still maintained by the government of Jakarta. And so we offer the spaces to collaborate. We offer them to collaborate with us in terms of providing spaces, because I think, of course, some of our management will say, why in the place like Jakarta History Museum or Jakarta Visual Art and Ceramics, why in this old town area there is no art public? And then I said, well, Jakarta Biennale should reach as much public as possible, not only art public. So I think I offered the bridge to the common public, to the bigger public. So I was like imagining like this crowd at the old town. There were like people coming from around the region of Jakarta or from outside Jakarta to see the building of the Jakarta History Museum with inside almost nothing except old furnitures from the Dutch time. So they make selfies in front of the old furnitures. They don't really experience the architecture, which was very nice, and the curatorial of the Jakarta history wasn't well done, and and so I imagined that time that public, like children, school children, with their parents, and having a time in the Saturday and Sunday time to see, the space and the architecture and a contemporary work. So this, the outreach of public actually, I was like proposing, yeah.
I think that biennials are increasingly globally in a way that's a form of cultural tourism that generates different kinds of public, and that in our part of the world, you could say that development of contemporary art has been largely due to the biennial platforms that have exploded. This obsession with audience making, though, can often be challenged if you choose sites that are slightly minority spaces within a major city. For example, like in Lagos, there are a particular railway site that you chose to actually have the last Lagos Biennial. And it presented some challenges to you in terms of building audiences and getting people to the site. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that.
Thank you. So the railway station wasn't exactly the first option as a venue. We'd gotten permission from the National Museum to use an outdoor space. This was like, say, a year and a half to the event, and at this point, any space will have been good enough because we didn't have the resources or the funds to pay for proper space or like a big venue. So whatever we had was going to fly. And so thematically, we were thinking in the lines of crisis, because founding a biennial, we thought the first edition should reflect the city of Lagos. And having lived in Lagos for 3 decades, the first thing that comes to mind for me personally is just like crisis. It's not a war zone, but you just feel like something can happen anytime. And so we decided to create like a refugee camp scenario and fill it up with tents and have artists make interventions in that space. So the next problem was where to get the tents from. So we wrote a letter to the UNHCR headquarters in Switzerland requesting for 50 tents. And at this time, we didn't even have money to send them letter by courier, so we used National Post, and it was going to take 2 weeks. And we waited for about 2 months. We never got a reply. And we got really introspective at this point. Like, why recreate something which at the end of the day might look corny? Why we're not fighting a war? I've never experienced living in a refugee camp before. So by chance, we just stumbled upon this. I mean, I stumbled upon this railway compound, and my entire team was mad at me because we had all our plans driven down to this National Museum space. And immediately I walked into this train station, which was built by the British colonial government in 1897. I just fell in love with it, and the fact that you had people living in the trains, living around the trains was really something. So Nigeria got its independence in 1960 from the British, and since then the whole railway network sort of crashed. Right now it runs about 15% capacity. So inviting artists to Lagos was never going to be a problem, because there are tons of artists who wanted to come to Lagos. And so we had 15 artists who were already based in Lagos, and I thought if all else fails, we'll have 15 artists for this biennial. If the biennial will happen in my studio, it would happen there, because there were issues that we had to address. And thinking about funding, it was, he who pays the piper dictates the tune. There was no way we were going to collect certain money and say certain things, because we were, pointing the pistol straight at the government. And even if we were going to dance to their tune, the major question was, who are these guys doing a biennial in Lagos? And we already had issues with the government, because the main picture we used to drive the biennial, the main image was the image of a building that was built by returnee Brazilian slaves, and the family who was in ownership of it had sold it to a developer and destroyed it, and the government was really embarrassed about this, and we put this massive image on our website, so there was no way we're getting money from the government. But in engaging with this space, which has a lot of history, it's Lagos used to be the capital of Nigeria, and Nigeria basically started in this railway compound. We had the Ministry of Justice, the central bank, in this massive railway compound. And about 30 years ago, the capital was moved to the center of Nigeria, which is Abuja. So we were tracing a lot of history, engaging these trains, and you see the pictures with artists making installations in and around this community and working with the people who live in the community. So there was a particular effort not to showcase the art, but in a way sort of embed it in the train station. And 6 months down the line, I get feedback, people who came to the exhibitions and just didn't understand it because they couldn't find the art, but our thinking was, if the people in this community were to make an art show, how would it look? And they did most of the installations, so it was just pretty much organic.
Thanks. I think what I loved about hearing about this initiative is that it's entirely artist-initiated, and it's a complete passion for everyone who was involved. I think that the idea of working in such a site was a brave one, considering that it's often occupied by people who are preferred hidden by society, i.e. it's a site that's often squatted, right? So in comparison, we have Dr. Apinan Poshyananda establishing the first Bangkok Art Biennial and choosing to work with 20 different venues. Is it 20? 20 different venues across Bangkok City. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about the diversity of the sites and your reasoning behind them.
Thank you, Zoe. First of all, thank you so much for letting me be on this panel. It's a great honor. We just announced the 75 participating artists for the Bangkok Art Biennale on Monday here in Hong Kong. So we are very excited that the artists who will be participating will be artists ranging from Marina Abramovic to Yayoi Kusama to very, very young emerging artists in Thailand, as well also our neighboring countries in Southeast Asia. Isa Yoksen, who is one of the artists selected, is here with us today. In comparison with Fola's space, Bangkok, I think people know a lot of Bangkok in terms of cultural destination. They like to go to Bangkok for various reasons. So we choose to have various venues along the main river, Chao Phraya River, which is the main river that has a lot of temples and heritage sites. And we've chosen 3 major temples. The Reclining Buddha Temple, some of you might have been. Another name is Wat Po. This temple is not just a Buddhist temple. I think for centuries now, it's like a melting pot where a lot of beliefs and faiths collide almost, because Brahmanism and Hinduism mixed with Buddhism, and also astrology, therapy, massage. All this takes place in Wat Po. So we ask artists, Thai and international, to contemplate and work at site-specific areas. And the images I just showed on the screen, you will see Hong Yong Ping. I'm sure many of you know. He came over to study and see the sites, and he'll be making some new works there. So we want to have the backdrop as the space where a lot of people go. Wat Arun, Temple of Dawn, is another temple. And these two temples, average people go there, 7,000 people a day. Anyway, this image is the Hong Yong Ping looking at these sculptures, Chinese sculptures in Wat Arun. And here's Michael M. Grin and Draxit studying the space. We have heritage sites also called the East Asiatic Building, which is about 100 years old. And M. Grin and Draxit will make their new swimming pool. You've heard of Bangkok's ear, right? Which is now showing in Shanghai. M. Grin and Draxit would create a new sculpture there also. So in terms of space, we want artists to work with the space. But not only along the river, we have other sites at the Bangkok Art and Cultural Center, public parks, and even outside shopping malls. So we feel that for Biennales to happen in Bangkok, and a lot of people have been waiting, local people have been waiting for such an event to happen, they can fully appreciate. Because we always have this dilemma of, contemporary art, does it communicate with the public, with the masses? At the same time, Biennales can draw a lot of people, draw a lot of hype, draw a lot of sensationalism, but what does it give to the public? So in this way, we hope very much that the first Bangkok Art Biennale will ignite and take a lot of attention, local and international people, and we plan to have at least 3 Bangkok Art Biennales. So we have 6 years to continuously do various themes. The theme of the Bangkok Art Biennale is Beyond Bliss. Beyond Bliss is, I think, it's like a word that maybe the concept is almost unreachable. Complete happiness. It may sound quite simplistic, but for example, when I discussed this with Marina Abramovich, she said, okay, we'll bring over the Marina Institute and do a 4-week-long performance, long durational performance, whereby people can interact with this idea of contemplation, refuge, trying to find the path and the pursuit of happiness. Because happiness and sorrow is, I think, complementary. Happiness is ephemeral, likewise sadness. And how to keep happiness, we have to understand how to suppress sorrow. So in that way, it may sound very conceptual. People say very Buddhist, but I feel that it's like international language. And the artists, 75 of them, will have their antennas to detect what is their interpretation along these site-specific venues that we have, 20 of them. Thank you.
I think in terms of my fellow panelists having, we have Melati as an artist and Fola as an artist and Apinan as a curator artist. I'm the one with the least creativity. I'm just a curator. But I think one of the differences with my own experiences of exhibition making is that I also have a history of running institutions. And as a director of institutions, being now involved with the Sharjah Art Biennial, it's interesting that one of the differences in working with foundations that work on long-term art programming for a public, to which a biennial just happens to be one of their programs, there is a very different relationship to space. And the biennial has access to an incredible number of sites in Sharjah. And the discussions that I've been having thus far are pulling on years of experience of working not only with a local community, but understanding the transient visitors that come from abroad for the various activities they run during the year. So the consideration of audiences is slightly different. It's more long-term. It seeks sustainability, and the kinds of programs very much in participating with the awareness of what's occurring on the international exhibition scene, on museum, artist collective, independent organisational front. And the level of research that goes into this awareness on the part of the Sharjah Art Foundation is actually quite astounding. And I think that when we are thinking of site-specific forms of working, I live and work in Vietnam, where the factory is the only purpose space built for showcasing contemporary art in the country. And so therefore there's a leadership that is required within this role as a curator. And I think that I'd like to touch on a little bit with this responsibility of initiating and curating and having an awareness of what that site might mean to a local. Because when we choose these sites to work, I question as a curator the possibilities of being sincere as a curator and an artist in that response if we're not allowing the time and the funds to give that artist appropriate time to really understand the community, to really understand the historic sense of spaces in which, in some circumstances, those works are left permanently, to which there becomes a whole other audience left behind, a local community that has to sit and live with these works on an everyday basis. So I'm wondering if any of you have any responses to this idea of asking artists to work specifically with these sites, and whether you've had any circumstances where it perhaps didn't work.
Yes. There was one artist, I don't want to mention the name, but we invited her to create her, actually to recreate her installation. But then she would like to make a new work. We appreciate very much. And then she came around 2 weeks, or almost 10 days before, and researched the area and the spirituality. She was very interested into the spirituality, and then but she did not come with the real ideas. So then she started the idea to make a research on the markets, flower markets. So she every night at 11 o'clock in the night until 3 o'clock, she went with our assistant to the flower market to search for flowers, certain flowers, and then the next day she brought, and then like to create materials that she imagined from her home is easy to get, but it's not easy to get in Jakarta. Like we had to provide even clay was very difficult to get in Jakarta. So nothing is immediate provided in the immediate situation. So finally they will come to compromise, but then she came the idea with a fire. So to use the fire inside the building, and then so how to make this possible? And then we consult. I even helped, to make what kind of oil you use for the safest, the safest oil, and then we try everything, and then finally it works, and it's okay, the fire go on, and then everybody was happy, the work was fine, was good, and she's also happy, but it was quite challenging for our assistants and technical assistants and to help. But other side, I think also like to change the gudang, our main site. It was like more famous with its urbanity, urban art, because Ruang Rupa working on it already like the last 3 years, and they changed into a kind of a melting point of the Jakarta urban artists, and mostly they work on the city as a theme for their projects, and to change the Gudang Sarinah into a proper exhibition space and design it with like kind of a museal spaces, and it was very challenging, but fortunately we have a very good team. We have a very good designers and constructions contractors, the contractors, and it changed, and then the impression changed. Everything became clean, and no graffitis anymore, and and everybody even like positively surprised. So like to change the site specific sometimes. How do you change like urban into kind of a museum like I think sometimes for Biennale we need to have a different kind of attitude or action towards a space and to give a kind of other options how to use the space also.
Yes, I completely agree. And we have to understand that our experience of public space is often very different. In Vietnam, for example, we don't have public spaces where artists are allowed to intervene. It's actually against government policy, particularly for contemporary artists. So if you were to ask a Vietnamese artist to do a site-specific public piece abroad, they would most likely have had very little experience. Do any of you have responses to my question?
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about this space. It's. I mean, we call it intervention, but it's more like an invasion, and it could be really problematic, especially if you're working with a space like this, which is like super precarious, and riddled with drug addicts, and the police always coming to raid the place. And in hindsight, we were a little naive about going into that space. It was happy-go-clappy. We were working with the people who lived there. We were paying them to guard the place all night. They helped us with installations. We were partying together. Up until a reporter from The Guardian in UK came around and wrote a story. So the railway management, which granted us this space for 6 weeks, had been having an ongoing battle with this community for a while, because some of the people who lived there were retirees from the railway corporation. Some people were just squatters, but they were all illegal, and they'd built like shanties around this railway station. So about a week to the opening of the Biennial, or like say 4 days to the opening of the Biennial, there was a lot of attention. People were coming in, artists from everywhere coming into this railway corporation, and they'd never seen this kind of crowd before, this amount of foreigners coming into the most unlikely place. It's a place they really hide and talk at the back, and they really wanted to give a good impression of themselves. So they started evicting these people, and it was exactly the day this Guardian reporter came, and she wrote an article online, and the article had nothing to do with Lagos Biennial. You could just find the words Lagos and Biennial in the whole caption. It was evictions taking place, blah, 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 in Lagos, blah, 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 Biennial. And I was getting calls from all over the place, like, what's happening? We hear you guys are evicting people to do your Biennial, and there was nothing further from the truth than that. It's such a space, like I was explaining to you before the talk started. You can't even walk there into that space if you don't have the, as it were, street credibility. There were times I would just throw myself into the fire, going there looking really tattered, like combing my hair, looking like I'm really part of them, and hoping they just don't kill me, because these guys, I mean, that's the life they live. But I don't think I would have traded that experience for, anything else. I don't think I will ever do it again. Not that severe a space, but it was golden. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, that I would have dialogues with artists and would pre-plan, what they would do, and this would involve site visits. Specific curating can be time consuming as well as costly, but I think it's worth it, because when you have such a dialogue, for example, last week Yoshitomo Nara came to Bangkok for a week, And he went with me searching for the site for the sculpture to be placed in the park. Another artist, I talked to her that I like her to make her work in the crocodile den in the temple, Wat Po. There are no crocodiles, by the way. Just previously it was called Crocodile Den, but she would do the homework about the story of this particular den, and it's going to be a beautiful site-specific where she does all the research. So the idea of this, people saying parachuting in artists, international artists, and let them do something or comment on something which they don't really know, and the press write about it, and then they parachute it out. I think something like that, at least me, I try to avoid. So in that way, some artists, have to do a lot of research. One Thai artist, he's been working with sex workers for a long, long time, more than 3 decades. And he's going to present their view of happiness, their view of beyond bliss. So he ended up interviewing these workers, and they allow him to video them in karaoke, in brothels, in various places. But the owners feel very scared. So this is a space of negotiation where there are many delicate issues where we have to overcome. But I think this is the excitement of it. And I think when it comes out, obviously there are going to be obstacles, but obstacles are there to be solved. So in that way, we hope very much that when the outcome is there in October and showing for another 3.5 months, people can come and appreciate the kind of research and the kind of effort that the artists have put in this Bangkok Art Biennale.
From my own experience of working with artists on projects, they want to have some relevance to site. I did a project with a Vietnamese artist, Lee Hoang Lee, who invested an enormous amount of personal funds to create Vietnam's first large-scale public art sculpture. You might have seen it rolling in the background. In Vietnam, because of the lack of understanding of contemporary art, however, there was not any public site willing to take the risk of housing and hosting this work before it had been created and realized. So there was this realization that we were going to have to create this sculpture, place it inside the Factory Contemporary Art Centre, and then literally pitch it to private parks and public parks in the hope that someone will be able to see how amazing it would be as an object in a constantly conceived and participated object. This is the differences of working in landscapes where the infrastructure for understanding contemporary art is challenging, and it's one that I think is a very valid learning experience. As a curator, when you're trying to push a scene, you're trying to encourage not only government but also private business and corporation for their ability to participate in the growth of culture in society. And to that end is another question for Apinan, actually, because the Bangkok Art Biennial is actually predominantly funded by the private industry. Can you share a little bit about how you managed to make this happen?
With a lot of talking. I worked in the government for a long time, and I understand, when the government changes, when political parties come in, even here, I think, they place certain priorities, and contemporary art, I tell you, is not very high. So funding does not come easy through government. Some, but not a lot. We got, for the Bangkok Art Biennale, we got some funding from the Ministry of Tourism, as well as the Tourism Authority of Thailand. But our main sponsors come from Thai Beverage, Central Group, Siam Paragon, One Bangkok, and these are big sponsors who like a lot of contemporary art, and they feel that creative people, creative class who create contemporary art can add value to their brands. So by working with them, there is a rapport whereby there is an understanding and reciprocal for the sponsors as well as the artists. So when that happens, there's energy. So working towards the first Bangkok Biennale, I think a lot of people outside the art world, in Thailand anyway, have put in a lot of money and effort and time and space. That's why we've got 20 venues. So in that way, this is like backstage working of curatorship, site-specific sponsorship.
I totally admire the fact that you've managed to get this up, because in Southeast Asia, again, we don't have a lot of private understandings of the role of contemporary art as a platform that is actually applicable to not only the knowledgeable, but also the general public. I myself have a very suspicious relationship because I get scared of the instrumentalization of artists towards pushing a brand or a government viewpoint. However, I'm in a bind when I realize that what other alternative as a curator do I have in such a landscape? It strikes me that we're having this discussion in Art Basel, a platform that, dare I hope, one day considers supporting the biennial and triennial platforms to support the kinds of experimental practice that we're, for people on stage, in support of. So we have about 10 minutes left for questions and answers. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to provoke us?
I have a question for Folakunle. I'm really curious to hear a little more about what it was like to be on site at the railway station and how the general public entered into that space, as well as the squatters. And did they appreciate people coming into this space? And also, did they also, in a way, appreciate the art? Were they curious?
Thank you. So the biennial coincided with Nigeria's first showing at the Venice Biennale last year. So there was like a biennial bug in the air, and for the first time, a lot of people were hearing about the concept of a biennial. And even at the time we spoke to the government, the guy in charge of culture didn't know what a biennial was. So you had a lot of people coming into that space, and Lagos is divided into the mainland and the island. The mainland is like middle class, lower class. The island is more bourgeois, and all the art activities, or most of the art activities, happen on the island, and all the galleries are on the island. But this railway compound is on the mainland, and there's this very important bridge in Lagos. It's the longest bridge in West Africa. It's called the Third Mainland Bridge. So you have international conglomerates, embassies who do not allow their expat staff to cross this bridge to the mainland. They actually sign contracts not to ever come to the mainland without like serious security. And so we had like tons of people in the diplomatic corps coming to the mainland for the first time to see this biennial. And the people in this railway community were super excited for once to have the spotlight on them. They're making a whole lot of money from doing this and that, from volunteering, from carpentry and stuff like that. And then we got really close with them, hanging out. And from social media, you could see them posting images and everything. But when the biennial was over, there was this particular dude who was really prominent and helping a lot of artists with the installations. He then put up a post, and it read, "Now that the biennial is over, what next?" And I really felt that, because one of my arguments for going into this space was, putting a spotlight on people who are eclipsed from the center of society, and the theme of the biennial was living on the edge. And right now, I'm in Hong Kong, going back to Germany to continue my residence in a few days, and nothing exactly has changed about this community, only that we've started a conversation. Yeah.
If you could just mention your name when you have a question. Just think.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm from New Zealand, and I've actually done 5 biennales, triennials there. So when you say that you were talking to people that had never heard the word biennial before, I understand. But I want to say I thought you had amazing courage in tackling what you did, and it sounded like an extraordinary event. So will you go back? Will you do it again? And if you do, how would you tackle it this time?
Okay, yeah, definitely. We will do the second edition in next year, 2019. And so, because I'm an artist with my own practice, I'm slowly trying to remove myself from the core of the artistic or curatorial part of the event, because it's a little too much for me. But already we have 3 curators who are working on the next edition, and already they get the vibe and they understand that they're not trying to import the concept of a biennial into Lagos. That was actually a name we use that tag in a very subversive way to bring attention to the narratives that we were trying to push. And they want to continue with that whole chaos analysis of Lagos, how the city works despite the chaos. So there's, like every other capitalist society, there's a few people with a lot of money and so many people without. But because as a country there's so many, 180 million people, and Lagos is a city with 21 million people, so the contrast is really stark. But the city still somehow works because everybody gets paid. Somehow you have Ferraris and tuk-tuks on the same terrible roads, but people are selling anything you can think of in traffic. It's dense, it's crazy, but at the end of the day, nobody's really complaining or protesting. We're not a protesting type of society, because we've had one civil war and nobody ever wants to go back there. So this is some sort of protest, and there's no letting go of this. Yeah.
We have another question up the front. Up here, front row. This lady was waiting.
Hi. Is it on? Okay.
Just hold it up.
Okay, cool. So my question goes about, first of all of you represent markets that are quite new, and some of you are leading into your countries in creating these exhibitions and these spaces, and you're very involved in choosing these spaces. And my question is about how, as the first time that you're doing this, do you feel a sense of responsibility in showing the reality that you're presenting through your work? As a curator, do you feel like you get to pick a little bit the reality you want to depict from your city? And your thoughts on that?
Before I start at all the process of making the Biennale, by choosing my co-curators, I offer already the theme that we are going to work, and that also telling them honestly the situation, honestly about because to make it's not just making an exhibition. It should represent a kind of what discourse we want to offer to the public. It's not just an exhibition making. I think Biennale is beyond making an exhibition, beyond making things happen or making a space become a spectacular. Something like this, spectacles. So it's what is underneath also, I think it was very important for us to be present. For example, of course, there are 3 elements that we were presenting through the Biennale, and besides the exhibition, we also published some books, which has to be put in the main program, because otherwise there is no focus of, for example, like to offer the relation with the locality of the knowledge in the local area, because we tend now to produce exhibition. We produce, like there's Art Basel, Art Jakarta, Art Stage. There are a lot of growing art fairs with lack of exhibition like Biennale, you know, and I think Biennale is that the task of Biennale is not only presenting a curator works, you know, like being proud of inviting big names and like this, but who will fit with our local situation also? Who will also work in terms of intellectual discourse also to make the exhibition happen? You know, so this is, I think, is very important. Besides all the makings itself,
I think it's also important when, as a curator, what stories are you trying to tell, and then that's going to help you decide what kind of artists you want to work with. I think when you're leading an institution or a biennial, the stories that you say is the reputation you put forth for the role of art. So, at least for me, living and working in communist contexts for the last decade, I've worked with artists who, quite particularly with careful nuance, know how to say things metaphorically that if you stand in front of the work for long enough, you're being given a slice of a historical perspective that you probably won't get anywhere else. And I think the choices that you make by the artists you choose to work with is how you sustain your organization. In Asia, at least, we face an explosion of space, either that be museum or private initiative. But I think that what's lacking is a leadership in understanding the narratives that you're representing. And as a curator, at least from my perspective, I think that's incredibly crucial.
Yeah, I think in terms of visitors, when they come to Bangkok, some people may have preconception of Bangkok is like. A lot of people think of Buddhism. A lot of people think of nocturnal tourism. A lot of people think of massage or you know, many kinds of perceptions, and we want to deliver. I think people come over here to Bangkok, I mean, they will get a sense of many slices, many mosaics of reflections, but not just through the Thai artists, but also international artists. Not only that, we will be hoping that we can be a stage for our neighboring countries. For example, Art Labor from Vietnam, the collectives, as well as for Laotian artists who will be working very closely with Thai artists on mural paintings, or the group called Muslima, this female Muslim artist from deep south of Thailand, which is that's full of terror and horror that's going on at the moment. We hope very much that they can bring in, and you know, through their lenses, through their perceptions, of people who visit Bangkok Art Biennale can get glimpses. Obviously, you won't get all. I mean, life is not like that. But at least people come and you know, can get some sort of perception of what is Bangkok and what is Thailand and what is the theme of Beyond Paradise.
Okay. For Lagos, it was pretty important to have a very elastic theme for artists to respond to, because we didn't have the luxury of making an open call, which will mean that we'll have to fly in all the artists and house them for whatever period the biennial was going to be for. So it was carefully selecting artists that we thought were eccentric enough to, one, go into that space, and also address topics that were quite sensitive. But it was also a little democratic in that, you know, the community and the society at large had a great deal of input, and people just, gathered around to show love and not be so critical of like a first. If I don't know if that makes sense, but people got the message. It looked very weird, very conceptual, but there was a lot of talking and a lot of conversation with the artists and the community, and they could understand, okay, yeah, this is what is happening, and people were throwing in favors, opening up their houses to artists, giving out cars, giving out money to get the thing running. So it did reflect a society that's very diverse in a sense. Yeah.
I don't know if we've got time for one more question. I was told we have to cut it at 5:02. Is that right? No one seems to be telling me yes or no. Is there any other question in the room? Oh, well, one in the front.
Yeah, I'm Mello from the Philippines, and I'm curious because, as you've mentioned, the public understanding of contemporary art is very, very challenging, and it's most felt in the Philippines because we're more than 100 million people, and very few understand the meaningful impact of contemporary art. That's why it's very difficult for artists to get their message across. I want to know. I'm curious in knowing what were the meaningful impact on your public who attended your Biennale.
I don't know yet because mine hasn't happened. But I was at the Manila Biennale. This is the first Biennale in Manila, and before I went, a lot of my friends said, "Don't go. It's like artists, just run. It's like it doesn't look." But I said, "I will go," and it was at Intramuros, which is a beautiful heritage site. And when I went there, it was really stimulating. Okay, low budget, but the artists who work there, Agnes Arellano, many artists who contribute to site specificity of the artwork. So I think that's a good beginning. And I think each nodal point where the Biennale takes place is totally different. And I think the next one, I'm sure the Philippine audience will appreciate more. But it's also, it's a matter of sustainability. You have to keep it going. Biennale means continuation. So it must have some sort of planning ahead. Otherwise, if it happens and then it stops and then it doesn't happen for another long time, people don't feel confident about that particular Biennale. That's why a lot of people talk about virus Biennale. That's why they question it so much.
Mine hasn't happened yet either. But I'll say that I hope that when people do come to the next Sharjah Biennial, that they learn a different piece of global art history. Not just art, but history. And understanding that via the looking at art, we can learn about different social environments. And they will be completely different to what you read in a textbook.
I think for the Jakarta Biennale, it was reaching different layers of public understanding of contemporary arts, because we were considering the differences of the public, also the possibility how they would understand or to start understanding a performance art practice through the biennial. So we really have chosen works that probably could fit to the public in the Jakarta History Museum, which is like more common public and school students and normal, like common public, and we provide like a Hito style installation. We provide performance art, a long durational performance. We provide a film documentary on Bisu, the transgender shaman from Sulawesi. So they were confronted a little bit, but they were invited to be curious. So they were really curious. The public were watching it, and so the main is, of course, like to get a kind of a new knowledge also about what is art. Is this art? Is this so to bring a public, an immense public, to ask, is it art? I think it's already something for us, for Indonesian situation. But also like for the art public, like contemporary art public, when they saw the selections of the works at the Jakarta Biennale, they were also like questioning themselves. So, is this old-fashioned contemporary art of Indonesia? Is it a bit old-fashioned? And then they're like, what is old-fashioned? What is new fashion? It's not about fashion, you know. So it's something that we need to offer to encourage ourselves to question also through the Biennale, to ask people to question, and because there are so many homeworks. Especially in our contemporary art practice, actually, it's also about resistance, how to see our like his own history of contemporary art with the perspective of the Western hegemony of history of aesthetic, for example, how to understand this both a combination within the local source and the occupation of thoughts. Western thoughts. So this was quite clear. So that's why it reached a lot of complexity also from the public.
Really short. For society like the Nigerian society, which is a little bit complacent on politics and societal issues, like everything goes on hush hush. In the beer parlor, like we have what they call a beer parlor philosophy. You know, you talk about everything, and at the newspaper stand in the morning, everybody knows like all the statistics, all the stories, all the history about the government and who's embezzling money and who is not, and all of that. But it was quite refreshing, and people could connect with, you know, seeing these things out in the open, and just realizing that the artists had the guts and the confidence to just lay themselves out there. There was a particular piece by a photographer called Christopher Nelson, and there's this situation in Lagos where for the past 10 years they've been sand filling the Atlantic Ocean to create this sort of Abu Dhabi city. It's 26 kilometers of just sand, and it's been incredible construction going on. So this guy for the last 4 years has been sneaking into this site as a day walker with his camera under his shirt and taking pictures of this place. And it's sort of forbidden to go in there. But he's been doing it consistently for 4 years, and he had over 2,000 images. And we made a selection, and he wanted to do like a tiny collage of little images, but we decided to blow just 4 images, really big. And, you know, people saw it and it really resonated. Yeah.
Oh, we have to cut it short there, but hopefully this discussion was enough sharing of context to make you all look at the art fair and the work on display and ask more questions about the sites of production in which these artists are working. Thank you all, and thanks for listening.